The dream of a poor boy. Dreams are strange things. They visit even the poorest souls, those who sleep on thin mats laid over cold concrete, those who wake up before dawn not because of ambition, but because hunger refuses to let them rest. Dreams do not ask about your family name, your address, or the balance in your bank account. They come quietly, whispering hope into hearts that have already learned how to endure pain. But when you are born poor, people tell you dreams are dangerous. They say hope is a luxury meant for others. They warn you that ambition will only bring disappointment. They teach you early to lower your eyes, soften your voice, and accept the life that has been handed to you. This is the story of a boy who heard those warnings every day and chose not to obey them. My name is Roy Carter. I was 13 years old the night I walked through a narrow alley on the south side of Los Angeles, my backpack hanging loose on my shoulders, empty except for a few notebooks with torn covers. The streetlights flickered like they were tired of shining on places like ours. Water dripped from broken pipes, and somewhere nearby, rats scurried between trash bags. That alley was part of my daily life. I knew which stones were loose, which puddles hid broken glass, which corners were safest when night fell. Poverty teaches you awareness early. It sharpens your senses. That night, something stopped me. Two children stood near a bent wire fence, illuminated by a weak yellow bulb hanging from a nearby shack. The boy couldn't have been older than 5. His clothes were thin and too small, his sandals worn down to the sole. He held the hand of a little girl, maybe 3 years old, who leaned against him as if he were her only support in the world. He looked at me with eyes far too serious for someone his age. "Mister," he said softly, taking a step forward. "Do you have some money? Just a little. We want to buy bread." His voice didn't beg. It explained. I swallowed hard. "Where's your mom?" I asked. "Your dad." The boy looked down at the ground. "Our mom is at the gambling house," he said after a moment. "She said she'd be back soon." The little girl tugged at his shirt. "My tummy hurts," she whispered. I knelt in front of them and opened my wallet. Inside was $1. That dollar represented hours of work, collecting plastic bottles under the sun, digging through garbage piles for scrap metal, enduring the smell and the stares. It was my bus fare for the next morning. Without it, I would walk nearly 2 hours to school. I hesitated only for a second. Then I placed the dollar in the boy's small hand. His face lit up as if I had given him treasure. "Thank you," he said, bowing his head awkwardly. The girl smiled, her eyes bright for the first time. "We can eat now, right?" she asked. "Yes," the boy answered, squeezing her hand. "We can eat." They walked away slowly, disappearing into the darkness of the alley, two tiny figures holding onto each other against the world. I stayed where I was long after they were gone. That night, I didn't just lose my bus fare. I lost the comfort of believing that suffering had limits. Our home sat at the edge of the community, where the road turned to dirt and the city seemed to forget we existed. It wasn't really a house. It was a shack built from plywood, rusted metal sheets, and blue tarpaulin patched together over the years. When the wind blew hard, the walls rattled. When it rained, water leaked through the roof and pooled on the floor, forcing us to move our things onto plastic crates. But it was home. My mother, Linda Carter, was crouched over a small firewood stove when I arrived. The pot held rice stretched thin with water. Her hair was tied back loosely, strands escaping as sweat rolled down her temples. "You're late," she said gently. "I walked," I replied. She didn't ask why. Mothers like her already know. My little sister Sarah came running from the corner of the shack. She was 5 years old, thin and fragile, with eyes too big for her face. "Roy," she shouted, wrapping her arms around my legs. "Did you bring candy?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out 2 small pieces I had saved from selling plastic bottles earlier that week. "Only 2, she teased, trying to look serious but failing. "Next time, 3, I promised." She laughed, and that laugh filled the room better than any furniture ever could. That night, as we ate rice with salt, my father Mark came home carrying a sack of recyclables. His back was bent, his hands cracked and bleeding. No one complained. We were together. I was 13 years old, but still in 4th grade. Poverty had stolen years from my education. There were times when I had to stop going to school for months, times when shoes were more expensive than knowledge, when survival mattered more than lessons. My uniform was faded. My notebook pages were filled on both sides, margins packed with writing because paper was precious. At school, the rich kids sat in the front rows. Their parents picked them up in cars. Their lunches smelled of fried chicken and warm bread. We, the poor ones, sat at the back. One afternoon, during lunch break, a boy named Andrew Miller stood up. "Everyone," he announced loudly, "let's help Roy. He looks like he hasn't eaten in days." He threw a piece of bread. It hit my face and fell to the floor. Laughter erupted. "You're poor," Andrew said, smiling cruelly. "People like you don't get dreams. You get jobs nobody wants." My chest burned, but I stood. "We're all equal in God's eyes," I said quietly. "And being poor doesn't make us less human." The room went silent. Andrew scoffed and sat down. That night, I studied under candlelight until my eyes ached. When the results came out, I ranked first. They laughed again. "He's too old," they said. "What's the point?" I didn't answer. I kept studying. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, a black SUV rolled slowly beside me as I walked home barefoot. "Roy," someone called. I turned, startled. The window rolled down, revealing Daniel Reyes. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Daniel used to live 2 shacks away from us. We scavenged together, skipped meals together, dreamed together. Then one day, he left, found work abroad, someone said. "You look thinner," he said, smiling warmly. "You look richer," I replied, half joking. He laughed. "Life was hard there too," Daniel said. "But I held on. That's the secret." He told me about long shifts, discrimination, loneliness, about sleeping in cramped rooms with strangers, about sending money home before buying anything for himself. "But it was worth it," he said, "because it changed my future." Before leaving, he placed a small card in my hand. "If you ever need help," he said, "don't be ashamed to ask." That night, I stared at the card for a long time. For the first time, poverty didn't feel permanent. Sarah was born with a weak heart. Some nights, she struggled to breathe. My mother would hold her, crying silently so Sarah wouldn't hear. When I turned 16 and entered high school, a sponsor offered to pay my school fees. I ran home with joy, but joy died when we reached the hospital. The doctor looked at us gently. "She has stage 3 blood cancer." My mother collapsed. Work and temptation. I worked everywhere. Construction sites, poultry farms, buses, markets. A classmate named Rusty offered me fast money. "Just deliver this," he said. I knew it was drugs. That night, I prayed. Then I remembered Daniel. I chose hunger over crime. Despite everything, Sarah grew weaker. Machines kept her alive. "Let her rest," my mother whispered. 3 days later, Sarah was gone. I screamed until my chest burned. I almost quit school. But Daniel said, "Would Sarah want that?" I graduated salutatorian. I studied accountancy. I worked. I endured. I was poor. I was mocked. I lost everything. But I did not lose my dream. Because dreams do not belong to the rich. They belong to those who refuse to let go. Our community was small, crowded, and loud. Everyone knew everyone's business. If someone bought meat, the neighbors noticed. If someone didn't come home at night, rumors spread by morning. Poverty doesn't just take money. It takes privacy. Some neighbors were kind. Mrs. Alvarez sometimes left leftover soup by our door without saying a word. Old Mr. Jenkins let me borrow books from his shelf, even though they smelled of dust and age. He once told me, "Knowledge weighs nothing, son. Carry as much as you can." Others were not. "Why do you study so much?" one man asked while watching me sort bottles. "You think you'll be somebody?" Another woman whispered loudly, "That boy is already old. School won't save him." I heard everything. At night, I asked myself if they were right. If all my effort was just another way to delay disappointment. But then I would look at Sarah sleeping, her chest rising and falling unevenly, and I knew quitting was not an option. One night, after dinner, my mother asked me to sit beside her. The shack was quiet. My father was already asleep, exhausted from the day's work. Sarah lay curled on a mat, clutching a worn-out stuffed bear. "I need to tell you something," my mother said. Her voice trembled. "I never finished school," she continued. "I was younger than you when I stopped. I wanted to be a teacher." She laughed softly, but her eyes were wet. "Life happened," she said. "Poverty happened." She took my hands. "I'm sorry we can't help you more," she whispered. "Sometimes I'm afraid your dreams will die because of us." I shook my head. "No, Mom," I said. "My dreams live because of you." She cried quietly, pressing her forehead against mine. That night, I understood something important. Dreams are not inherited. They are entrusted. By the end of that year, nothing had changed on the outside. We were still poor. The shack still leaked. My shoes were still worn. But inside me, something had shifted. I no longer studied just to escape poverty. I studied to honor sacrifice. And that made all the difference. I entered high school at 16 years old. Most of my classmates were barely teenagers, 12, 13 at most. Their voices cracked when they spoke. Their laughter came easily, and their worries were still small enough to fit inside notebooks and lockers. When I stood among them during the first morning assembly, I felt like I had arrived late to a life that had already begun without me. My uniform didn't fit properly. The sleeves were too short, the fabric thin from years of washing. My shoes were repaired with glue that hadn't fully dried. Every step reminded me that I didn't belong. When the homeroom teacher, Mrs. Thompson, read my name from the class list, she paused. "Roy Carter," she said, squinting at the paper. "Yes, ma'am," I answered. She looked up, her eyes scanning my face, then down again. 16, she asked softly. "Yes, ma'am." A murmur spread across the room. Is he repeating? He looks older than my brother. Mrs. Thompson cleared her throat. "Please take your seat." I walked to the back of the room, every footstep echoing louder than it should have. I chose the last desk by the window, where I could look outside when the stairs became too heavy. From there, I could see the city, buildings stacked on top of each other, laundry hanging from windows, smoke rising from places like my own home. During introductions, students talked about hobbies, favorite shows, weekend trips. When it was my turn, I stood. "My name is Roy," I said. "I like studying." That was all. A boy near the front snickered. "Studying is not a hobby," he whispered, loud enough for others to hear. I sat down, my ears burning. Classes moved quickly. Algebra formulas covered the board. History lessons jumped between dates I should have learned years ago. I copied everything carefully, afraid to miss even a word. At lunch, I opened my bag. Inside was rice wrapped in paper. Around me, lunches smelled of fried food and sweet drinks. Some students traded snacks. Others complained about homework. I ate quietly, staring at my hands. A girl sitting across from me glanced over. "That's all you eat?" she asked, not unkindly. "Yes," I replied. She nodded, unsure what to say. When the bell rang, I felt relief and fear. Relief that the day was over. Fear that tomorrow would be the same. As I walked home that afternoon, my shoulders ached, not from work, but from carrying the weight of being different. That night, I told my mother about school. She listened carefully. "Being late doesn't mean being lost," she said. "It just means your path is harder." I lay down on the mat beside Sarah, staring at the ceiling. I promised myself something. No matter how old I was, no matter how long it took, I would finish. Humiliation did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, small enough to ignore at first, sharp enough to leave marks. It started with whispers when teachers turned their backs, laughter when I raised my hand, nicknames passed between desks like secret notes. "Old man," "Grandpa." I pretended not to hear them, but pretending takes effort. And effort, I was already running out of. The worst days were physical education days. The locker room smelled of sweat and cheap cologne. Boys shoved past one another, laughing loudly, full of energy I didn't have. I changed quietly, folding my worn uniform carefully and placing it in my bag so it wouldn't wrinkle further. As we lined up on the court, one of the boys, Ethan, tall and confident, the kind who had never been hungry, stepped in front of me. "Hey," he said, blocking my path. "You sure you're in the right class?" A few others gathered around. "You look like the coach," another joked. Laughter followed. I tried to step around them. Ethan shoved me, not hard enough to knock me down, just enough to test how much I would tolerate. I stumbled, caught myself, and straightened up. "Move," I said quietly. "What was that?" he asked, leaning closer. "Speak up." I didn't answer. The teacher, Mr. Collins, stood at the far end of the court, checking attendance. He glanced up, saw us standing there, and looked away. Something inside me tightened. The boys noticed. Ethan smiled. He bumped into me again, this time harder. My shoulder hit the metal fence behind us. Pain shot down my arm. Still, I didn't fight back. Because I knew what would happen if I did. Because I had seen boys like me blamed for defending themselves. The bell rang. "Lucky you," Ethan said. Next time, the rest of the class passed in a blur of whistles and running shoes. I jogged when told, stretched when told, kept my head down. After class, I sat alone on the steps, waiting for the ache in my shoulder to fade. A younger student passed by and whispered, almost apologetically, "Sorry." I nodded. That afternoon, I went to work with bruises hidden under my shirt. At night, as I washed my face, I saw the mark on my shoulder in the cracked mirror. For a moment, I wanted to quit. Not just school, everything. But then I remembered Sarah's voice asking if she could go to school one day. I clenched my fists. Humiliation, I realized, was temporary. Giving up would be permanent. Work began where school ended. When the final bell rang, other students gathered in groups, laughing as they planned movies, games, and dinners. I walked in the opposite direction, toward places where hands were needed more than names. My first job was at a construction site 2 miles from school. The foreman never asked my age. He only looked at my arms, my posture, and whether I showed up on time. "Carry those," he said on my first day, pointing to sacks of cement. Each bag felt heavier than the last. Dust coated my throat and eyes. By noon, my shirt was soaked through, my muscles screaming for rest I couldn't afford. During breaks, older workers smoked and joked about weekends. I drank water slowly, counting how many hours I had left. Some days, the foreman paid me. Some days, he said, "Come back tomorrow." I always did. When construction work was scarce, I worked at the market. I woke before dawn to unload vegetables from delivery trucks. Crates of tomatoes, onions, and potatoes bruised my palms and bent my spine. The air smelled of earth and rot. "Faster," a vendor shouted. "You're paid by the hour, not the day." At night, I cleaned poultry cages behind a butcher's shop. Feathers stuck to my clothes. The stench followed me home. One evening, as I scrubbed my hands raw, my legs gave out. I sat on the ground, dizzy, my vision narrowing. For a moment, I thought about not getting up, about sleeping there, about letting the world move on without me. But then I remembered my mother's hands, cracked from soap, my father's bent back, Sarah's uneven breathing. I stood. By the time I reached home, it was dark. Sarah waited for me every night. "Did you eat?" she asked. "Yes," I lied. She smiled, satisfied. After dinner, I opened my books. Numbers blurred. Words doubled. Some nights, my head fell forward before I could finish a single page. I woke to Sarah gently shaking me. "Roy," she whispered, "you'll hurt your eyes." I smiled at her and closed the book. Sleep came fast. Morning came faster. And I did it all again. Hope arrived quietly, like it was afraid of being noticed. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the school secretary appeared at the door of our classroom. "Roy Carter," she called. Every head turned. My stomach tightened. I stood slowly, wondering what rule I had broken this time. The principal's office smelled of polished wood and old paper. Certificates lined the walls, names of students who had succeeded, faces that looked nothing like mine. The principal, Mrs. Reynolds, gestured for me to sit. "Roy," she said, folding her hands, "your teachers have been watching you." I lowered my eyes. "Your grades are excellent," she continued, "and your attendance, given your circumstances, is remarkable." She slid a folder across the desk. "A private sponsor has chosen you," she said. "They will cover your tuition, books, and basic school expenses." For a moment, I didn't understand the words. Cover, tuition, sponsor. Does that mean, my voice cracked, my parents won't have to pay? She smiled. "That's exactly what it means." My hands shook as I held the folder. I wanted to cry. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to run. "Thank you," I whispered. I left the office in a daze. The hallway looked different, brighter somehow. The same cracked tiles, the same peeling paint, but my steps felt lighter. I didn't wait for dismissal. I ran. I ran all the way home, shoes slapping against the pavement, heart pounding with a feeling I barely recognized. When I burst into the shack, my mother startled. "Mom," I said, breathless. "I don't have to stop school." She stared at me. "What? A sponsor?" I said, holding up the folder. "They'll pay." Her hands flew to her mouth. She sat down slowly, as if her legs could no longer hold her. "Thank you, God," she whispered. My father hugged me, rough arms shaking. That night, we ate rice with a little canned meat Mrs. Alvarez had given us weeks earlier, saved for a day we never thought would come. Sarah clapped her hands. "Does this mean you'll be a teacher?" she asked. "Something like that," I said, smiling. For the first time in years, we talked about the future. I went to sleep holding the folder against my chest. I was afraid that if I let go, hope would disappear. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. The doctor spoke slowly. Stage 3 blood cancer. The words fell like stones. My mother collapsed. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old prayers. Roy sat on the cold metal bench outside the pediatric ward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Across from him, his mother, Linda Miller, stared at the tiled floor as if answers might rise from the cracks. She hadn't cried yet. That scared him more than tears. Sarah lay behind the swinging doors, small and still, a bundle of tubes and wires swallowing her tiny body. She looked asleep, peaceful even, but Roy knew better now. He had learned the language of hospitals, the beeping monitors, the hushed urgency in nurses' voices, the way doctors avoided eye contact when they didn't yet know how to explain the truth. Dr. Harris finally approached, clipboard pressed to his chest. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," he said gently. Roy stood up so fast the bench screeched against the floor. "Yes, sir," Roy said before his mother could speak. "How is she?" The doctor exhaled slowly. "We ran multiple tests to be sure. Blood work, bone marrow analysis." He paused. "I won't sugarcoat this." Linda's fingers tightened around Roy's sleeve. "Sarah has leukemia," Dr. Harris said. "Stage 3. The words hit like a blow to the chest. Roy heard his mother gasp, a sound like something tearing open. His own ears rang. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single thought. This can't be real. "She's 5, Roy whispered. "She just learned how to spell her name." Dr. Harris nodded, eyes full of sympathy. "I know. I'm so sorry. What do we do?" Linda asked, her voice shaking. "Please, tell us what to do." "Treatment is possible," the doctor said. "Chemotherapy, possibly transfusions. But it will be long, aggressive, and expensive." Roy didn't miss the weight of that last word. "How expensive?" he asked. Dr. Harris hesitated. "Even with assistance programs, you're looking at amounts that," he stopped himself. "We'll try to help you find options." Linda broke down then, sobbing into Roy's chest. He wrapped his arms around her, feeling suddenly older than his years, older than anyone should have to be. Inside, something in Roy hardened. "I won't let her die," he thought. "Not like this." That night, Roy stayed awake beside Sarah's bed. She stirred, eyelids fluttering. "Brother Roy," she murmured. "Why are you crying?" He wiped his face quickly and forced a smile. "I'm not. I just got something in my eye." She reached for his finger, weak but determined. "Don't worry. I'll get better. We still have to play, remember?" His throat closed. "Yeah," he said softly. "We will." Outside the room, reality waited. Bills, numbers, dead ends. Roy listened as his parents whispered late into the night, about selling what little they had, about loans no one would approve, about prayers that felt too small for something this big. When his father finally spoke to him the next morning, his voice was heavy with defeat. "Roy, maybe you should stop school for now." Roy shook his head immediately. "No, I'll work more. I'll find a way." "Son, I promised her," Roy said, his voice firm despite the fear clawing at his chest. "I promised I'd take care of her." That was the moment the story changed. Not because hope disappeared, but because it became something painful, something he would have to fight for with everything he had. Roy standing alone in the hospital hallway, staring at the vending machines glowing in the dark, wondering how many nights a person could survive on fear and determination alone. The first compromise did not look like a crime. It looked like help. Roy found it on a damp Thursday evening behind the market, where the smell of rotting vegetables mixed with rain and diesel. He had just finished unloading crates when Mr. Klein, one of the delivery coordinators, motioned him over with 2 fingers. "You're the kid who never complains," Mr. Klein said, lighting a cigarette. "Always on time. Always working." Roy nodded. Compliments made him uneasy. "I heard about your sister," Klein continued. "Word travels." Roy stiffened. "She's sick," he said. Klein exhaled smoke slowly. "I might have something for you. Easy work. Cash." Roy hesitated. "What kind of work?" "Deliveries," Klein said. "After hours. No questions. Just packages." Something in his tone tightened Roy's chest. "I already work nights," Roy said. "This pays better," Klein replied. He scribbled a number on a scrap of cardboard and pressed it into Roy's palm. "One run could cover a week of your usual jobs." Roy stared at the number. It was more money than he had ever held at once. That night, at the hospital, he watched Sarah sleep under fluorescent lights. Tubes traced paths across her arms like maps he didn't know how to read. A nurse quietly adjusted a drip. "How much is today?" Roy asked softly. The nurse gave him a careful look. "You should talk to billing." He did. The numbers made his vision blur. On the way home, rain soaked his shoes. He pulled the cardboard from his pocket. The ink had begun to smear. He thought about his mother counting coins at the table, his father avoiding his eyes, Sarah promising she would get better. He dialed the number. The first delivery was small, a sealed envelope, an address across town. "Don't open it," Klein said. "Don't be late." Roy rode the bus with the envelope pressed against his ribs, every bump feeling like accusation. The building was dark. A man answered the door without greeting, took the envelope, and closed it again. That was it. No sirens. No violence. No blood. Klein paid him in cash. Roy stood in the alley afterward, hands shaking, waiting for guilt to arrive. It didn't. What arrived instead was relief. At the hospital the next morning, he handed the bills to the clerk without flinching. For the first time, the total went down instead of up. "You're doing a good job," the clerk said absently. Roy nodded. That night, as he washed his hands, he noticed they were trembling. He told himself it was exhaustion. He did not tell himself the truth, that a line had been crossed so quietly he hadn't heard it snap. The second job did not come with explanations. It came with urgency. Mr. Klein called just after midnight. Roy was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with unpaid bills spread like accusations. The phone vibrated once, then again. "You awake?" Klein asked. "Yes," Roy said. "Good. I need you now." The pickup point was no longer the market. It was an abandoned warehouse near the rail yard, its windows boarded, its walls layered with graffiti and rust. A van idled nearby, engine humming low. Inside, another man waited, taller, quieter, eyes that measured instead of greeted. "Name's Victor," he said. "You don't talk to me unless I talk to you." Roy nodded. The package was heavier this time. Too heavy to be paper. Wrapped in plastic, taped tight. "Same rules?" Roy asked. Victor smiled thinly. "More rules." Roy felt his pulse in his ears as he took the bus across town. Every stop felt louder. Every passenger looked suspicious. He imagined police lights where there were none. At the drop-off, a woman opened the door just wide enough to take the package. Her hands were shaking. "Be careful," she whispered before closing it. When Roy returned, Victor handed him an envelope thick with cash. "Next time," Victor said, "don't use the bus." The money changed things. Bills disappeared faster. Nurses smiled more. His mother stopped counting coins. His father stopped suggesting he quit school. But school began to slip. Roy arrived late, left early, slept in class. Teachers noticed. "Everything all right?" Mrs. Reynolds asked. "Yes," Roy lied easily. The jobs multiplied. Packages became boxes. Boxes became crates. One night, a siren wailed too close. Roy ducked into an alley, heart hammering, breath shallow. He stayed there long after the sound faded, palms pressed to his knees, trying not to be sick. That night at the hospital, Sarah touched his face. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine," Roy replied. She studied him. "You're different." The cost did not announce itself. It accumulated. Roy missed his first exam on a Tuesday morning. He had planned to make it, set 3 alarms, washed his face with cold water, but the job the night before had run long. Too many boxes. Too many stops. When he woke, the room was bright. Too bright. He ran to school anyway, legs burning, lungs tight, but the classroom door was already closed. Mrs. Patel met him in the hallway. "You're late," she said gently. "I know," Roy replied. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. "This isn't like you." He didn't answer. The lies came easier now. To teachers, to his parents, to himself. "I'm staying late to study. I'm working extra shifts. I'm fine." At the hospital, a nurse asked him to step aside. "You can't keep sleeping here," she said quietly. "You're falling asleep, standing up." "I just need a minute," Roy replied. She shook her head. "You need more than that." At home, his mother watched him eat without tasting. "You barely talk anymore," she said. Roy forced a smile. "Just tired." Sarah stopped asking questions. That hurt the most. One evening, Roy forgot to bring her favorite storybook. She didn't cry. She turned her face toward the wall. That night, Roy vomited in the alley behind the warehouse. His hands shook so badly he dropped his phone. Victor watched him with mild interest. "Careful," Victor said. "You're no good to anyone broken." Roy wiped his mouth. I'm okay. Victor nodded. That's what they all say. The next day, Mrs. Reynolds called him into her office again. You're at risk of losing your sponsorship, she said. Your attendance is slipping. Your performance too. Roy felt the floor tilt. I'll fix it, he said. She studied him. You don't have to do everything alone. Roy thought of the warehouse, the boxes, the cash. Yes, he said. I do. That night, he counted his money. Then he counted the things he was losing. Sleep, truth, time. The balance was no longer even. And for the first time since the diagnosis, Roy wondered, not if he could keep going, but how much of himself would be left if he did. The call came during chemistry class. Roy felt the phone vibrate against his leg, once, twice. He didn't look at it. He already knew who it was. The third vibration was longer. Mrs. Patel was writing equations on the board. The room smelled faintly of chalk and disinfectant. Roy raised his hand. Bathroom, he said. She nodded without turning. He walked fast, then faster, until he was alone in the stairwell. He answered. Where are you? Victor asked. At school. Silence. You need to leave, Victor said. Now. Roy closed his eyes. I can't. You can, Victor replied. Or someone else will do your job. Someone less careful. What's the job? Roy asked. Big, Victor said. And time-sensitive. Roy thought of Sarah's latest test results folded in his pocket. Thought of Mrs. Reynolds' warning. Thought of the scholarship hanging by a thread. I'll be there, he said. He didn't return to class. The warehouse was different that afternoon. Louder, crowded, tense. Men moved quickly, voices low. The crate Roy was given took 2 people to lift. What's inside? Roy asked before he could stop himself. Victor's eyes hardened. That's not your concern. The delivery route cut through the city center. Bad planning. Police cars lined the street ahead. Flashing lights reflected off shop windows. Roy's chest tightened. Stop, Victor ordered from the front seat. Here. Roy grabbed the crate. Walk, Victor said. Don't run. Each step felt like a countdown. A police officer glanced at him, then looked away. Roy exhaled only after he turned the corner. At the drop-off, the door didn't open. He knocked again. Sirens erupted behind him. Roy, Victor shouted from the van. Drop it. Roy froze. If he dropped the crate, he'd be free. If he ran, he'd be guilty. He thought of Sarah's fingers around his own. He ran. The crate was heavier than fear. He stumbled, nearly falling, shoes slipping on wet pavement. Shouts followed. Footsteps. He ducked into an alley and slammed the crate down behind a dumpster. His hands burned. His lungs screamed. When he finally looked up, the alley was empty. The crate sat where he left it. So did the choice he had made. That night, Roy didn't go home. He sat on the hospital roof until dawn, watching the city wake up. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. And somewhere deep inside, he knew, even if he escaped the law, he would never escape himself. The city did not collapse after that night. Roy half expected it to. He walked through streets that should have felt different, streets where he had run, hidden, nearly been caught, but everything looked the same. Buses hissed at stops. Vendors argued over prices. A dog slept beneath a bench like nothing in the world had shifted. Only Roy felt altered. Victor did not call. That silence pressed harder than any threat. Roy checked his phone compulsively, even though he knew there would be nothing. No instructions. No anger. No reassurance. At the hospital entrance, a police officer stood talking quietly with a nurse. Roy's pulse jumped. His hands went cold. He lowered his head and walked past, waiting for the sound of his name. None came. Sarah was awake when he entered. You missed breakfast, she said, trying to sound stern. I know, Roy replied, forcing a smile. I'll make it up to you. She studied him longer than usual. You're still here, she said finally. That's good. The words cut deeper than accusation. At home, the house felt smaller. A message waited on the table, written carefully in blue ink. Roy, please come see me. We're worried. Mrs. Reynolds. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He did not go. 2 days later, the market didn't open. Police tape sealed the warehouse. Men gathered across the street, whispering in fragments. Someone said raid. Someone said informant. Someone said Victor's gone. Roy stood among them, invisible. When officers carried crates out of the building, his stomach turned. He recognized the tape. The markings. That night, his father sat across from him at the table. Where did the money come from? He asked. Roy opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His mother covered her face and cried quietly. From the hallway, Sarah listened. Silence filled the house like smoke. The knock came before dawn. Roy had not slept. He was sitting at the small kitchen table, staring at a crack in the wall, when the sound cut through the house. 3 sharp raps, precise and unhurried. His mother woke first. "Who is it?" she called, already afraid. Roy stood. "I'll go," he said. When he opened the door, 2 police officers stood on the step, uniforms crisp, faces neutral. Between them was a woman in a gray coat holding a folder against her chest. "Roy Carter?" the woman asked. "Yes." "You're under arrest," she said. "You have the right to remain silent." His mother screamed behind him. The sound followed him as the cuffs closed around his wrists, cold, heavier than he expected. In the back of the patrol car, the city slid past in fragments. Streetlights, closed shops, a man sweeping his doorway like it was any other morning. At the station, time dissolved. Questions came in steady waves. "Who recruited you? How long? What were you moving?" Roy answered his name. Nothing else. The woman in the gray coat watched him closely. "You're not a hardened criminal," she said finally. "You know that, right?" Roy stared at the table. "I know," she continued, "because hardened criminals don't look like they're waiting to be punished." Hours later, a public defender sat beside him. "You're young," she said softly. "That matters. You didn't profit the way others did." Roy nodded. It didn't feel like it mattered. When he was placed in a holding cell, the door closed with a final metallic echo. For the first time since everything began, Roy stopped running. He sat on the bench and let his head fall into his hands. The fall was quiet, but it was complete. Roy was allowed one visit. The guard said it like a kindness. They led him through hallways that smelled the same as before. Antiseptic, plastic, something faintly sweet that tried and failed to mask fear. He remembered walking these corridors freely, carrying hope like a fragile object. Now he carried nothing. Sarah's room was quieter than he expected. The machines were still there, but their sounds had softened, as if even they were tired. Sunlight crept through the blinds, touching her face gently. She looked smaller. "Hey," she said when she saw him. Her voice was thin but steady. "You're late." "I know," Roy said. His throat tightened. "I'm sorry." She smiled anyway. She always did. He sat where the guard indicated, just far enough away that he couldn't reach her. The space between them felt cruel. "Mom cried," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "Dad too." Roy nodded. "I know." She tilted her head, studying him with a seriousness that didn't belong to someone her age. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. "Yes." She absorbed this quietly. "Did you do something bad?" Roy swallowed. "I did something wrong." She considered the difference. "For me?" she asked. He looked at her then. Really looked. "Yes." Her hand lifted slowly, weak but determined, and pressed against the glass separating them. Roy stood and placed his palm over hers, the barrier cool and unforgiving. "I don't want you to be sad," Sarah said. "And I don't want you to be bad either." The words undid him. Tears blurred his vision. "I just wanted you to live," he whispered. She smiled softly. "I did. I am." A nurse appeared at the door. "Time," she said gently. Roy stayed standing, hand against the glass, memorizing the warmth that wasn't really there. "Promise me something," Sarah said. "Anything. Don't disappear," she said. "Even if I do." He shook his head, a silent no, but she was already closing her eyes, exhausted by the effort of speaking. As the guard led him away, Roy did not look back. If he did, he knew he wouldn't be able to leave. The courtroom was smaller than Roy expected. He had imagined something grand, echoing, built to intimidate. Instead, it felt cramped, wooden benches worn smooth by years of waiting, the air heavy with dust and old decisions. Roy stood when told. The cuffs were gone, but he felt them anyway. His mother sat behind him, hands folded tightly in her lap. His father stared straight ahead, jaw locked, as if movement might break him. Sarah's chair was empty. The prosecutor spoke calmly. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She spoke of patterns, of escalation, of choices made repeatedly, not accidentally. "Compassion does not negate responsibility," she said. Roy listened without flinching. When the defense spoke, the words were softer. A young man, a sick child, a family without resources. Context. Roy wondered when context stopped being explanation and became excuse. When it was his turn to speak, the judge looked at him directly. "Do you understand why you are here?" she asked. Yes, Roy said. Do you regret your actions? He hesitated. I regret the harm, he said finally. I don't regret loving my sister. The room went still. The judge closed her eyes for a moment. When the law is broken, she said slowly, someone must answer for it. She paused. But the law is not blind to circumstance. The sentence was light. Probation, community service, mandatory education. Relief rippled quietly through the room. Roy felt none of it. As the gavel fell, he understood something with aching clarity. Punishment was finite. What he carried would not be. Time passed differently after. Roy worked where he could, studied where he was allowed. Mrs. Reynolds visited once. You're still capable, she said. He didn't answer. Sarah passed on a quiet morning. Roy held her hand. She did not hurt. Years later, Roy taught evening classes. He told students the truth. That good intentions matter. That choices matter more. Some nights, he dreamed of crates and sirens. Some mornings, he woke grateful. Love had cost him everything. It had also saved what mattered. Roy's sentence did not begin with a gavel. It began with a form. A clipboard slid across a scratched wooden desk, and a man who did not look up when he spoke. Sign here. Community supervision. 2 years. Roy signed his name slowly. Each letter felt heavier than the last. Not because of the punishment, but because of what was missing. Sarah was not there. The courthouse emptied in waves. Shoes echoed. Voices blurred. Roy stepped outside into a late afternoon that felt offensively normal. The sky was clear. Children laughed somewhere down the block. A street vendor argued about change. Life, apparently, had not been informed. Dado stood by the steps, hands in his jacket pockets. He did not say, I told you so. He did not say it will be okay. He only nodded once, the way men do when words would insult the moment. You coming home? Dado asked. Roy hesitated at the word home. Yes, he said. I think so. Home had changed shape. The shack still leaned the same way, but the silence inside it was new. Sarah's corner was untouched. The small plastic chair, the worn-out coloring book, the doll Roy had bought too late. Mom kept busy, always moving, always cleaning something already clean. Dad sat longer now, said less. At night, Roy lay awake listening to the ceiling breathe. The promise echoed louder in the dark. Don't disappear, even if I do. So he didn't. Community service was not redemptive. It was repetitive. Sweeping streets, sorting donations, carrying boxes until his shoulders burned. People did not ask questions. They rarely looked at him long enough to care. One afternoon, a boy watched him work. How long you gotta do that? The kid asked. 2 years, Roy said. That sucks. Roy almost smiled. Grief came in intervals. Some days it was quiet, just a pressure behind the ribs. Other days it arrived without warning, sharp and total. The sound of laughter. The sight of a red ribbon. A girl skipping rope. Roy learned to keep breathing anyway. He went back to school part-time. Night classes. Accounting books that smelled like dust and hope. Brother Dado helped where he could, never making it feel like charity. You earn what you keep, Dado said once. Even peace. On Sarah's birthday, Roy visited the cemetery alone. He brought no flowers. Only a promise he repeated aloud, voice steady even when his hands were not. I'm still here. The wind answered nothing. But Roy stayed. Years later, Roy would struggle to explain the moment when survival stopped feeling like defiance and started feeling like responsibility. There was no single turning point. It happened slowly, in pieces. In the way his mother laughed again, quietly, as if testing the sound. In the way his father's shoulders softened when Roy came home on time. In the way the house learned a new silence, one that did not accuse. Roy finished his probation without incident. No ceremony marked the end. A stamped document. A handshake from a clerk who had already forgotten his face. Freedom arrived without celebration, and Roy accepted it without relief. He kept working. Numbers made sense. They obeyed rules. They did not pretend to be fair, but they were honest. Roy learned to respect that. At night, he volunteered at the clinic. Not because he thought it would redeem him, because it was where Sarah still felt closest. He did paperwork, cleaned equipment, sat with families who didn't know what questions to ask yet. He never told his story unless asked. When he did, he spoke plainly. I made choices, he would say. Some were wrong. Love was not one of them. People listened. Some judged. Some didn't. Roy learned that neither reaction changed what remained. One afternoon, years later, a girl sat in the clinic waiting room, swinging her legs nervously. She reminded him of Sarah, not in appearance, but in the way she tried to be brave for someone else. "Does it hurt?" she asked him. "Sometimes," Roy said honestly, "but it helps." She nodded, accepting this like truth. Roy never became a symbol. No headlines carried his name. No speeches were made. His story did not resolve cleanly enough for that. But he stayed. He paid his bills. He showed up. He answered when needed. When people asked him what he believed in now, he took a long time before replying. "Presence," he said, "and consequence." On the anniversary of Sarah's death, Roy returned to the same cemetery. He stood longer now. Older. Steadier. "I didn't disappear," he said softly. "I kept the promise." The wind moved through the grass. Roy turned toward the city. The same city, still flawed, still indifferent, still full of people trying. He walked back into it. Not forgiven. Not forgotten. But here, as I walked through a dark alley, I noticed two children begging for money. I reached into my wallet and handed them $100. They were shocked. Perhaps the amount was more than they had ever received before. After that, I took them to a nearby eatery so they could have a proper meal. The scene stirred an old memory in me. There was a time when only $1 was all I could give. Now, things were different. I could give as much as I wanted. As they ate, I joined them. With every bite they took, every spoonful they swallowed, I could feel their eagerness to eat, born from days of hunger and empty stomachs. I realized then, Roy is not the same person he once was. After all the trials I endured, all the insults and humiliation, here I am now, a successful accountant. Yes, you heard that right. I was able to finish my studies through sacrifice, perseverance, and of course, with the help of Brother Dado, whom I will never forget. Standing there, I found myself reliving the hardships of my past. This very alley had witnessed my struggles. It had seen the boy I used to be. As we continued walking, I asked the children where they lived. They pointed to a small shanty where their large but joyful family lived, cramped together yet full of life. It reminded me of my own childhood, how we were happy even when we had nothing. I said goodbye to the two children and told them to keep striving, to study as hard as they could, because education is their strongest weapon against poverty. It has been 8 years since I graduated, cum laude. After that, I sold newspapers, worked as Brother Dado's driver, and took on every honorable job I could find just to support myself while reviewing. By God's grace, every sacrifice was rewarded. I became a certified public accountant. Many companies competed to hire me, and now I work for a well-known accounting firm. We have our own house and a car. We eat 3 times a day, sometimes more. But despite all this, I never forget where I came from, and I am never ashamed of having been poor. My parents are busy now too, managing our convenience store near our home. We live in a subdivision. Everything once felt like an impossible dream, but nothing is truly impossible if you work hard and keep your faith in God. Wherever my sister Sarah may be now, I know she is happy, knowing that I have achieved all my dreams. And to all the people who once looked down on me, who insulted and belittled me because I was poor, I thank you. You became one of the reasons I refused to give up in the battle of life. Thank you for this opportunity. I hope I have become an instrument of hope for those who continue to dream, even when life feels unbearably hard. May we never give up too easily, because with every effort, dreams can come true. Never quit, never surrender, and never give up.